Some have suggested you could appeal straight to the Supreme Court because of the special nature of this case. When it comes to the legal maze that you're still facing, and the judge could decide to say, hey, house arrest or even jail. How do you face what that could look like?
I'm okay with it. I saw one of my lawyers the other day on television saying, oh, no, you don't want to do that to the president. I said, you don't beg for anything. You just, the way it is.
In an exclusive interview with Fox and Friends Weekend, Donald Trump telling us that he would be okay with house arrest or even jail as he vows to quickly appeal his conviction. Criminal defense attorney Lexie Rigden joins us now. Lexie, thanks for being with us. What do you think is the likelihood that sentencing 1 month from now results in Donald Trump being confined in some way, whether or not that's house arrest or jail?
You know, I don't actually think that that's likely. He's 77 years old. He's a first-time offender. This is a nonviolent crime. So I think that the more likely outcome is probably something like a probation. And then also, you know, the authorities have to also keep the optics of this in mind. I mean, I understand that they took him to trial and it was a divisive decision to even do that, but it's different taking him to trial than actually confining the leading presidential candidate days before the Republican National Convention. So, I mean, that would be a very significant thing. And I think it would look really, really bad for Bragg's office, the judge, the Democrats in general. So I also think that probably, even if they're not saying it has to come into play, but in terms of just the legality and the laws in New York, I think probation is probably the most likely outcome.
There's a conversation, and we asked him yesterday a bit about this, but there's a conversation about appealing directly to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can intervene. They're not usually likely to intervene early in an appeals process. What do you think about that prospect in order to expedite the ultimate outcome of this verdict, of his team going directly to the Supreme Court?
Well, I think any options are on the table. He has had a very legally aggressive strategy in every case, and the Supreme Court, as we have seen, has taken up some of his cases. But the Supreme Court certainly doesn't have to, and the vast majority of cases do not get heard by the Supreme Court. So I would expect that in the normal course, he would have to appeal it through the normal channels, and then we'll go from there.
All right, we're about to have another trial, Lexie. Tomorrow, a jury selection begins in Hunter Biden's federal gun trial. Tell us what we should expect about this trial of Hunter Biden.
Well, the trial of Hunter Biden is not probably going to last very long. I mean, the evidence against him, it's a pretty straightforward case. He filled out a form allegedly falsely saying that he was not addicted to drugs in order to get a firearm. And then there's a lot of evidence that, in fact, he was addicted to drugs at that time. And so I don't expect that it's going to be a very long trial, given how quickly the Donald Trump jury was picked. And he's far more high profile than Hunter Biden. I don't think it's going to take an inordinate amount of time to pick a jury there. I've heard some speculations that there potentially could be some type of last minute deal on the table. But considering, I mean, that is always a possibility. I mean, you could enter a plea deal as the jury's being called up. But I think that that's probably unlikely, especially with everything that's happened in the past in this case with the collapsed plea deal. So he's going to be going to trial, most likely. And one of the issues that the defense has sort of telegraphed that they're going to use is the definition of what an actual addict is and whether he should have known what addict actually means in terms of filling out that form.
So whether or not that admission, as he has admitted at times to being an addict, whether or not he's familiar with the definition of being an addict will be the defense for Hunter Biden?
Well, what it exactly means, because apparently he had been in rehab right before then. So how are they going to instruct the jury on what the definition of an addict is? Is it that he's taken, how recently does he have to have taken drugs or engaged in the activity in order to consider himself an addict? I mean, this is very, very nuanced. There have been motions about it. So that's just one of these things that the defense is trying to seize upon in terms of this case.
All right, Lexie Rigden, thanks for being with us this morning, Lexie.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.